The entire executive hall froze the moment Karen Webb sat on the Alpha CEO's lap. Karen's heartbeat was so loud she thought the entire room could hear it. Every wolf, every hybrid, every creature of power gathered in the marble-floored atrium of Nightfall Tower. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the lapels of Cassian Dreven's perfectly tailored suit jacket, the fabric expensive enough to pay her rent for a year. She could feel the heat of his body beneath the layers of silk and wool, could smell the dark, dangerous scent of him, winter storms and old magic, something that made her wolf whimper and curl tight inside her chest. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't be touching him. She definitely shouldn't be sitting on the lap of the most powerful alpha in the city, the man whose very presence made pack leaders bow and corporate executives sweat through their designer clothes. But the alternative was worse. The mate mark on her left wrist burned like someone had pressed a branding iron to her skin. Silver and black, twisted together in a pattern that looked beautiful until you knew what it meant. Until you knew who had put it there. Ronan Blackmore stood 15 feet away, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. He looked like every corporate predator wrapped in charm, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that promised pleasure right before they delivered pain. The other wolves in the room saw a rising star, a young enforcer destined for pack leadership. Karen saw the man who had whispered the same pretty lies to her sister before he killed her. The Bond Selection Summit was supposed to be sacred, ancient. The moon goddess herself ordained these matches, weaving fate between souls that were meant to complete each other. Karen had watched dozens of wolves over the years receive their marks, had seen the joy and wonder in their eyes as they recognized their perfect other half. When her mark appeared 3 days ago, burning itself into existence during the pre-summit lunar ceremony, she had felt nothing but horror. Because Ronan Blackmore was many things: powerful, influential, protected by corporate immunity and pack law, but he was not her destiny. He was her nightmare. The summit hall was a testament to supernatural wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city's skyline, lights glittering like fallen stars against the darkness. The marble floor reflected everything, making it feel like they were all floating in some impossible space between earth and sky. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, each one worth more than Karen would earn in her lifetime as a junior legal analyst. The wolves and other supernatural creatures gathered here represented the elite, pack alphas, corporate CEOs, council members who shaped laws and decided fates. And at the center of it all, elevated on a platform that might as well have been a throne, sat Cassian Dreven. Karen had seen him before, of course. Everyone who worked at Nightfall Holdings had seen him, though usually from a distance. He didn't attend staff meetings or mingle at corporate events. He existed in a realm above the rest of them, untouchable and unreachable. The rumors about him were endless, that he hadn't taken a mate in over a century, that he couldn't feel emotion, that his wolf was so powerful it could level the entire city if he ever lost control. Looking at him now, Karen believed every word. His face could have been carved from stone, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked capable of crushing bone, eyes so pale they were almost colorless. Silver blue, like ice under moonlight. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the clean lines of his face, and he sat perfectly still in his chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other had just curved around Karen's waist when she'd thrown herself into his lap. She had crossed the marble floor in her cheap heels, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had felt every eye in the room follow her, had heard the gasps and whispered exclamations. Junior analysts didn't approach the Alpha CEO. Low-ranking wolves didn't touch the most dominant predator in the supernatural hierarchy. But Karen had studied every clause, every loophole, every ancient law buried in the corporate contracts that governed their world. She had spent 3 sleepless nights searching for a way out, and she had found exactly one option. Corporate sanctuary. It was archaic, barely used, written into the founding documents of Nightfall Holdings back when supernatural corporations first began to merge ancient pack law with modern business. If a wolf claimed sanctuary with a more dominant alpha, if they bound themselves as protected property before witnesses, it could override even a mate bond ordained by the moon. But it required contact. Physical claim. Submission to greater power. It required this. Cashin hadn't moved when she approached. Hadn't flinched when she'd climbed into his lap like some desperate, foolish thing. His expression remained perfectly neutral, perfectly controlled, but Karen felt the moment his attention shifted entirely to her. It was like being caught in the gaze of something primordial, something that existed before language had words for fear. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet enough that only she could hear it. "You're shaking." 3 words. Simple. Observational. But underneath them, Karen heard something else, a question, maybe, or the beginning of one. "I claim corporate sanctuary," she whispered, forcing the words past her tight throat. Her legal training kicked in, giving her the precise language even as her wolf cowered. Under the Dominance Clause, Article 7, Section. "I know the law." His fingers tightened fractionally on her waist. Not painful, but unmistakably possessive. A claim being made in front of everyone watching. "Do you understand what you're asking for?" Yes. No. She understood she was trading one cage for another. She understood she was binding herself to a man rumored to be incapable of mercy, let alone love. She understood that corporate sanctuary meant she would belong to Cashin Dreven in every way that mattered, protected, yes, but also owned. But she also understood that Ronan Blackmore had killed her sister, and if she let this mate bond snap fully into place, she would spend the rest of her life tied to a murderer. She would wake up next to him every morning, would feel his hands on her body, would bear his children, and watch them grow up learning his cruelty. Her sister Kira had been beautiful, brilliant, destined for greatness. She had been a senior analyst at Nightfall, rising fast, making connections, building a future. Then one day she went on a routine training exercise with the Enforcement Division and came back in a body bag. "Accidental shift collision," the report said. "Tragic loss," the pack leaders said. "These things happen," Ronan Blackmore said, his hand on Karen's shoulder at the funeral, his sympathy as fake as everything else about him. Karen had spent 2 years gathering evidence, piecing together witness statements and discrepancies in the official reports. She knew the truth. Ronan had orchestrated Kira's death because her sister had discovered something, some financial irregularity or illegal dealing that would have destroyed his career. And he had buried it all under corporate immunity and pack silence. She couldn't prove it. Not yet. But she could escape it. "I understand," Karen breathed, meeting those ice-cold eyes. "I'm asking you to let me choose a different fate." Something flickered in Cashin's expression, too fast for her to read, gone before she could name it. Then his gaze lifted, sweeping across the assembled crowd, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire hall with unmistakable authority. "Sanctuary claimed." The effect was immediate. Gasps. Angry muttering. A few pack leaders actually stepped forward in protest before catching themselves, remembering exactly who they were challenging. Ronan's smile had finally faltered, replaced by something darker, something that promised retribution. But it was done. Witnessed. Binding. Cashin's attention returned to Karen, and he leaned closer, his breath ghosting against her ear. To anyone watching, it might have looked intimate, possessive, the alpha claiming what was now his. But his words were for her alone, quiet and devastating in their certainty. "I won't let him touch you." For words. A promise or a threat. Karen couldn't tell which. Her wolf, which had been cowering in terror since the moment the mate mark appeared, suddenly went very still. Not calm, wolves like her were never truly calm around an alpha this powerful, but quiet. Watchful. As if some ancient instinct recognized that the greatest danger in the room had just declared itself her shield. Karen's hands were still shaking where they gripped Cashin's jacket, but she made herself breathe, made herself hold his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to look away, to submit, to acknowledge the vast gulf of power between them. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking him for. For accepting her desperate gamble? For not throwing her out of his lap in front of everyone? For speaking those 4 words that sounded almost protective? Cashin didn't respond. He simply stood, and Karen found herself lifted with him, her feet leaving the ground for a dizzying moment before he set her down beside his chair. His hand remained on her lower back, not intimate, not gentle, but unmistakably claiming. The message was clear to everyone watching. She was under his protection now, bound to his authority, removed from the mate bond lottery that had tried to shackle her to Ronan Blackmore. The summit coordinator, a nervous-looking vampire in an expensive suit, cleared his throat. "Alpha Driven, this is highly irregular. The mate bond has already been ordained by corporate sanctuary supersedes ordained bonds." Cashin's voice cut through the protest like a blade through silk. "It's written into our founding laws. Or do you need me to recite the exact clause?" The vampire paled, actually paled, which was impressive considering he was already dead, and shook his head quickly. "No, Alpha. Of course not. The claim is recognized." Ronan finally moved, stepping forward with that dangerous grace all enforcers possessed. Up close, Karen could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled expression, could smell the anger rolling off him in waves. But he kept his voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly civilized. "Cashin. Not Alpha. Just the name, a subtle challenge. Surely we can discuss this privately. The girl is confused, overwhelmed by the bond. If we just—" "The girl," Cashin interrupted, his voice dropping to something lethal and cold, "has a name. And she just invoked a law older than you, Blackmore. Unless you'd like to challenge my authority in front of the entire summit." The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Challenging an alpha like Cashin Driven wasn't just dangerous, it was suicidal. Ronan might be powerful, might have connections and corporate backing, but he was nothing compared to the predator standing in front of him. Ronan's smile returned, but it was edged with something vicious now. "Of course not. I simply want what's best for my mate." "She's not your mate anymore." Cashin's hand pressed more firmly against Karen's back, and she felt the weight of his dominance roll out in a wave that made every wolf in the room drop their eyes. "She's mine." Hey, beautiful soul. Welcome back, Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button. Your support means a lot. The private elevator to Cashin's executive suite moved in complete silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that pressed against Karen's ears until she thought they might pop. She stood 2 feet away from him, her arms wrapped around herself, trying not to think about what she'd just done. Trying not to feel the mate mark on her wrist, which had stopped burning the moment Cashin declared his claim, but now pulsed with a different kind of heat. Confusion, maybe? Or rage from the bond that had been overridden before it could fully snap into place. Cashin stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the ascending floor numbers. He hadn't spoken since they left the summit hall. Hadn't looked at her. Hadn't acknowledged her presence at all except for the way he'd positioned himself between her and the elevator doors, a barrier of muscle and dominance that would stop anything trying to reach her. Karen's mind raced through everything she knew about corporate sanctuary, searching for details she might have missed in her desperate research. The protected wolf would live under the Alpha's authority, subject to his rules, bound to his territory. They couldn't leave without permission. Couldn't make major decisions without approval. In exchange, they received absolute protection. No one could touch them, challenge them, or harm them without going through the Alpha first. It was designed for wolves in genuine danger. Political refugees from other packs. Witnesses who needed protection during corporate investigations. Not junior legal analysts trying to escape a mate bond with a murderer. The elevator doors opened directly into Cashin's penthouse, and Karen's breath caught despite everything else happening. She'd seen wealth before, worked in a building full of it, but this was different. The entire space was done in shades of charcoal and silver, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city sprawled below like a circuit board of light. Modern furniture, clean lines, everything precisely placed. It felt less like a home and more like the inside of some beautiful, sterile machine. Cashin moved into the space without looking back, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a leather chair. He rolled up his sleeves with methodical precision, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that looked like they'd been earned in battles, not boardrooms. "You'll take the guest suite," he said, his voice still that same flat, emotionless tone. He gestured toward a hallway branching off the main living area. "Second door on the right. Security system requires my authorization to leave the floor. Don't try to circumvent it." Karen swallowed hard. "I won't. You'll report your movements to my assistant. Any meetings, any contact with other employees, any trips outside this building require clearance." "I understand." "Do you?" He finally turned to look at her, and the full weight of his attention was staggering. Those pale eyes swept over her, clinical and assessing, like she was a problem he needed to solve. "Because 3 hours ago, you were nobody. A low-ranking analyst with unremarkable bloodlines and minimal pack connections. Now you're the wolf who sat on my lap in front of the entire supernatural elite and claimed sanctuary from an ordained mate bond. You've made enemies you don't even know exist yet." The words hit harder than Karen expected. She'd been so focused on escaping Ronan, on finding any way out of that nightmare, that she hadn't fully considered what came after. What it meant to be tied to Cashin Driven, to be seen as his, what? Property? Pet? Protected asset? "I had no choice," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "Everyone has choices." Cashin moved to a bar cart near the windows, pouring 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. "You chose to research archaic corporate laws instead of accepting your fate. You chose to walk across that hall in front of everyone. You chose to touch me without permission." He took a slow sip, his expression never changing. Most wolves would rather die than make those choices. Most wolves aren't being bound to their sister's killer. The words escaped before Karen could stop them, sharp and bitter in the pristine space. She immediately regretted it, not because it wasn't true, but because she'd just revealed the real reason behind her desperate gambit. The personal vendetta that had nothing to do with fate or destiny, and everything to do with justice that would never come. Cashin went very still. Not the casual stillness of before, but something else. Something that made Karen's wolf press flat against her consciousness, recognizing a predator that had just locked onto prey. "Explain." It wasn't a request. Karen's hands trembled as she wrapped them around herself again, trying to hold in words that wanted to spill out. She'd kept this secret for 2 years, had told no one except the investigators who dismissed her claims as grief-induced paranoia. But something about the way Cashin looked at her, like he actually wanted to know, like her answer mattered, made her tongue loosen. "My sister, Kiera Webb. She worked here, senior analyst in the mergers division. 2 years ago, she went on a training exercise with the enforcement team and died in what they called an accidental shift collision." Karen's throat tightened, but she pushed through. "Except Kiera was one of the most controlled shifters I've ever known. She wouldn't have lost control during a routine exercise. And 3 days before she died, she told me she'd found something. Financial discrepancies in enforcement expense reports. Money being funneled through shell companies." Cashin's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened fractionally on his glass. "And you believe Ronan Blackmore was involved?" "I know he was. He led that training exercise. He filed the incident report. And within 6 months of Kiera's death, he was promoted twice and given oversight of the very division she'd been investigating." Karen's voice cracked. "I spent 2 years trying to prove it. 2 years gathering evidence that no one would look at because he's protected by corporate immunity and pack law. And then 3 days ago, the moon decided I should be his mate. That I should spend the rest of my life bound to the man who killed my sister and got away with it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cashin set down his glass with careful precision, then moved toward her with that same predatory grace. Karen's instincts screamed at her to back up, to run, but she forced herself to stand still as he stopped directly in front of her. This close, she could see details she'd missed before. The faint silver threading through his dark hair. The way his jaw tightened, the only sign of tension in that otherwise controlled face. The scars that marked his hands, not just battle scars, but something else. Burns, maybe. Old ones. You claimed sanctuary to escape a murderer, he said softly, and there was something in his voice now. Not emotion, exactly, but awareness. Like he was seeing her properly for the first time. Not because you feared the bond itself. Because you feared being shackled to someone who would destroy you the way he destroyed your sister. Yes. The word came out as barely more than a breath. Cashin's hand lifted, and Karen's wolf whimpered as he reached toward her face. But he didn't touch her. Instead, his fingers caught her left wrist, turning it so the mate mark was visible in the dim light. Silver and black, still beautiful despite what it represented. This should be burning, he observed. Mate marks that are overridden before they fully form usually cause pain for weeks. Sometimes months. But yours is dormant. Karen stared at the mark, at the way Cashin's thumb rested just below it on her pulse point. I don't understand. Neither do I. He released her wrist and stepped back, and the loss of his touch felt strangely significant. But I've lived long enough to know that the moon doesn't make mistakes, even when we think she does. If you were marked for Blackmore, there was a reason. And if you were able to override that bond through corporate law, there's a reason for that too. You sound like you believe in fate. Something that might have been amusement flickered in those pale eyes. I believe in patterns. Causes and effects. Actions and consequences. He moved back toward the windows, putting distance between them again. You walked into my territory, sat on my throne, and claimed protection from a mate you believe killed your sister. Those are actions. Now we deal with the consequences. Karen's heart hammered. What consequences? Ronan Blackmore isn't going to accept this quietly. Corporate sanctuary is legal, but it's also humiliating. You rejected him in front of the entire supernatural hierarchy. Refused a bond ordained by the moon. Made him look weak. Cashin's gaze fixed on the city below, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. He'll challenge this. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when he does, you'll need to be ready. Ready for what? To prove you're worth protecting. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd met him, Karen saw something that might have been interest in his expression. You said you spent 2 years gathering evidence against Blackmore. That means you're smart, persistent, and capable of working against your own interests for a larger goal. Useful qualities. I'm not a pawn in whatever game you're playing, Karen said, finding some fragment of courage despite everything. No, Cashin agreed. Pawns are disposable. But you're under my protection now, which means your enemies are my concern. And I don't like unsolved murders in my territory, especially ones involving my employees. He moved toward her again, and this time Karen did step back, her shoulders hitting the wall beside the hallway entrance. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that dark scent of winter and magic. His hand came up, palm flat against the wall beside her head, caging her without touching. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice dropping to something quiet and dangerous. You're going to give me everything you have on Blackmore. Every witness statement, every financial record, every suspicion. And I'm going to do what you couldn't. I'm going to prove he's a murderer. Because corporate sanctuary only protects you as long as I maintain authority over you. If Blackmore successfully challenges me, if he proves you claimed protection under false pretenses, the sanctuary dissolves. Karen's breath caught. What happens then? Then the mate bond snaps fully into place, and you belong to him. Cashin's eyes held hers, pale and pitiless. So we make sure that doesn't happen. Why? The question escaped before Karen could stop it. Why do you care? I'm nobody to you. A low-ranking wolf who created a political problem by sitting in your lap. Why not just hand me back and avoid the conflict? For a long moment, Cashin didn't answer. Then his free hand lifted, and this time he did touch her, his fingers catching her chin, tilting her face up so she couldn't look away. Because when you walked across that hall, you weren't afraid of me. You were afraid of him. His thumb brushed her jawline, and Karen's wolf went absolutely still, caught between terror and something else entirely. Every wolf in that room has been afraid of me for over a century. They see a monster with too much power and no emotions. They see something to be avoided, appeased, never approached. But you saw Sanctuary. His hand dropped, and he stepped back, releasing her from the cage of his presence. No one has looked at me like that in a very long time, he said quietly. Like I might actually be capable of protection instead of just destruction. So I'm going to honor that faith, whether you intended to give it or not. Then he turned and walked toward the far end of the penthouse, leaving Karen pressed against the wall, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She thought she was trading one cage for another. One dangerous alpha for a different kind of threat. But standing there in the dark, expensive silence of Cashin-Driven's territory, Karen realized she might have been wrong. This wasn't a cage. This was a weapon. And somehow, she'd just convinced the most dangerous predator in the city to aim it at the man who'd killed her sister. Karen didn't sleep that night. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment, king-sized bed with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly salary, an ensuite bathroom with heated floors and a shower that had more settings than her laptop, a walk-in closet that echoed when she stepped inside. Everything was perfect. Clean. Impersonal. Like a luxury hotel room designed for someone passing through, not staying. She sat on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, her cheap summit gown feeling ridiculous against the expensive linens. The mate mark on her wrist had stopped pulsing hours ago, gone dormant like Cashin said, but she could still feel it. A weight. A reminder of what she'd escaped and what she'd bound herself to instead. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered endlessly. Karen watched the lights and let herself remember things she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Kira had always been the strong one. 3 years older, brilliant, fearless in ways Karen never learned to be. Their parents died when Karen was 12, a car accident, mundane and horrible, and Kira had raised her. Worked 2 jobs while finishing school, made sure Karen had everything she needed, taught her how to shift without fear, how to navigate pack politics, how to survive in a world that ate weak wolves alive. When Kira got the position at Nightfall Holdings, it felt like every sacrifice had been worth it. Senior analyst before she turned 28. Fast-tracked for leadership. The kind of success that opened doors for wolves like them, no powerful bloodlines, no alpha genetics, just intelligence and determination and the refusal to accept that their rank meant they deserved less. Karen remembered the last time she saw her sister alive. Kira had come to her apartment, agitated in a way Karen rarely saw. She'd paced the small living room, her wolf close to the surface, anxiety rolling off her in waves. I found something, Kira had said, her voice tight. Money moving through enforcement accounts. Hundreds of thousands over the past year. Shell companies, fake vendors, expense reports that don't match actual operations. Karen had made tea, trying to calm her sister down. Report it to internal audit. That's what they're there for. I tried. Kira's hands had been shaking. They told me I was overstepping, that enforcement handles their own finances, that I should focus on my actual division. But Karen, this isn't just administrative fraud. This is organized. Someone high up is using company money for something, and they're burying it. Then go to the alpha. Karen had believed, back then, that authority meant justice. That if you found proof of wrongdoing, someone would care. Driven doesn't tolerate corruption. Everyone says so. Kira had laughed, but it sounded bitter. The alpha doesn't involve himself in operational matters. He's too far removed, too focused on the big picture. By the time something reaches his attention, it's already been filtered through 6 layers of management. People who might be involved or protecting whoever is. So, what are you going to do? Her sister had stopped pacing, turning to face her with that fierce determination that made Karen believe Kira could accomplish anything. I'm going to gather enough evidence that they can't ignore it. Documents, transaction records, testimonies. Something so solid that even the corporate lawyers can't bury it. 3 days later, Kira was dead. The official report said she'd lost control during a routine training exercise. That her wolf had gone feral without warning, that she'd attacked Ronan Blackmore, that he'd been forced to defend himself. Tragic accident. Unfortunate loss. The pack had held a memorial service. Nightfall Holdings had sent flowers and a condolence bonus. Ronan himself had attended the funeral, his expression appropriately somber, his words carefully sympathetic. Karen had known immediately that something was wrong. Kira didn't lose control. Ever. She'd been shifting since she was 13, had perfect discipline, had never once shown signs of instability. And the idea that she would attack an enforcer, a dominant wolf trained in combat, was absurd. But when Karen tried to ask questions, she hit walls everywhere she turned. The enforcement division refused to release detailed incident reports. Witnesses gave vague, rehearsed statements. The corporate lawyers cited confidentiality and liability concerns. Even the pack elders told her to accept the moon's will and move on. So Karen had buried her grief and started digging in secret. She'd used her position in legal analysis to access old files, cross-reference expense reports, track down transaction records that should have been deleted but weren't. She'd found the same patterns Kira had seen, money disappearing through fake vendors, enforcement accounts being used to fund something off the books. And at the center of it all was Ronan Blackmore. He'd approved the suspicious transactions. He'd filed the reports that buried them. He'd been promoted twice in the year following Kira's death, rising from senior enforcer to division head to his current position overseeing all field operations. Karen had documented everything. Built a case file that she kept encrypted and backed up in 3 separate locations. But without a witness willing to testify, without someone high enough in the hierarchy to push the investigation forward, it was just a collection of circumstantial evidence that proved nothing. Until 3 days ago, when the mate mark appeared and Karen realized the moon was about to bind her to the man who'd murdered her sister. She'd panicked. Spent 2 days researching every possible way to break or refuse a mate bond, knowing that most of them involved death, hers or his. Then she'd found corporate sanctuary buried in the founding documents, an archaic protection clause that predated modern pack law. It was insane. Desperate. The kind of gamble that would either save her or destroy what little life she'd managed to build after Kira's death. But sitting on Cashin Dreven's lap in front of the entire supernatural elite, feeling his arm wrap around her waist, hearing him say those 4 words, "I won't let him touch you," Karen had felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. She stood from the bed and moved to the windows, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The city sprawled below, indifferent to her problems, to her grief, to the impossible situation she'd thrown herself into. Somewhere down there, Ronan Blackmore was probably planning his next move. Figuring out how to challenge the sanctuary, how to get her back under his control, how to finish what he'd started with Kira. And somewhere in this penthouse, Cashin Dreven was, what? Sleeping? Working? Did alphas like him even need rest? Karen's wolf stirred uneasily in her chest. The animal was confused, caught between the severed mate bond that still whispered wrongness and the new reality of being claimed by a predator so much more powerful than anything she'd encountered before. Wolves were meant to submit to greater dominance. It was instinct, written into their genetics, but submission required trust. And Karen didn't trust easily anymore. A soft knock on the door made her jump. She turned, her heart suddenly racing, as the door opened and Cashin stepped inside. He'd changed clothes, traded the formal summit attire for dark pants and a simple black shirt, sleeves still rolled up. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. In the dim light of the guest room, he looked almost human. Almost approachable. "Can't sleep," he observed, not quite a question. Karen shook her head. Too much happening. Too much to process. He moved into the room, maintaining distance, but filling the space with his presence nonetheless. "The mate mark will settle within a few days. The dormancy is temporary. You'll still feel phantom pulls toward Blackmore until your system fully accepts the override." "How do you know?" "I'm old, Karen. Very old. I've seen sanctuary claims before, though admittedly never in quite such dramatic fashion." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his expression. "You have a gift for making an entrance." Despite everything, Karen felt her lips twitch. "I was going for effective, not dramatic." "You achieved both." Cashin moved to the windows, standing beside her but keeping careful distance. His reflection was sharp in the glass, all angles and controlled power. "I need to know what I'm working with. The evidence you gathered on Blackmore, how solid is it?" Karen took a breath, switching from terrified wolf to the legal analyst she'd trained to be. "Financial records showing irregular transactions through enforcement accounts. Vendor invoices that don't match actual deliveries. Expense reports filed by Blackmore personally. It's pattern-based evidence. Individually, each transaction could be explained away, but together they show systematic fraud." "Witnesses?" "Two enforcers who were present during Kira's training exercise. Both gave official statements supporting Blackmore's version of events, but one of them, Marcus Thorne, approached me 6 months ago. Said he wanted to talk but was afraid. We met once in a public cafe, and he told me Kira didn't attack Blackmore. She'd been trying to leave the exercise, said she wasn't feeling well. Blackmore followed her into the woods, and when Marcus went to check on them, Kira was already dying." Cashin's jaw tightened. "Did Thorne give you a written statement?" "No. He disappeared before our second meeting. Transferred to a different division. Blocked my messages. I think Blackmore found out we'd talked." "So you have financial evidence of fraud and a witness who won't testify to murder." Cashin's tone was analytical, not critical. "Not enough to bring charges, but enough to start an investigation if someone with sufficient authority pushed for it." "Which is exactly what I didn't have," Karen said quietly. "Until now." He turned to look at her directly, and Karen forced herself not to flinch from the intensity of his gaze. "You understand what you're asking me to do? If I investigate Blackmore officially, it becomes political. Other pack leaders will see it as me using corporate authority to settle personal scores. They'll question my judgment, possibly my position." "I know." Karen's hands clenched at her sides. "But you said you don't like unsolved murders in your territory. My sister deserves justice, even if it costs me everything." "What about what it costs me?" The question hung between them, sharp and challenging. Karen met his gaze steadily, finding courage she didn't know she still had. "Then tell me what you want in exchange. Name your price for helping me, and I'll pay it." Something shifted in Cashin's expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. "Most wolves in your position would promise anything and worry about consequences later. I'm not most wolves." Karen lifted her chin. "And I don't make promises I can't keep. If you want something from me, tell me honestly. I'd rather know what I'm agreeing to than be surprised later." Cashin studied her for a long moment, and Karen had the strange sensation of being truly seen. Not assessed or analyzed, but recognized as something more complex than a problem to solve. "I don't want payment," he said finally. "But I need something from you that you might not be willing to give." "What?" "The truth about your bloodline." His eyes held hers, pale and penetrating. "You said you come from unremarkable stock. No alpha genetics, no powerful heritage. But the mate mark on your wrist shouldn't be dormant. The sanctuary override shouldn't have worked so cleanly. And I can sense something in you, Karen. Something that doesn't match what you claim to be." Karen's wolf went very still. Cold dread washed through her chest because Cashin was right. There was something she hadn't told anyone. Something Kira had discovered right before she died, something their parents had hidden for reasons Karen was only beginning to understand. I don't know what I am, she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep. Not completely. But my mother's family, they weren't just regular wolves. Kira found records, genealogy documents. Our maternal line traces back to Lunacrest territory. Cashin went absolutely still. Lunacrest fell 3 centuries ago. I know. The bloodline was supposed to be extinct. But my mother's grandmother survived, hid her heritage, married into a normal pack. Karen's throat tightened. Kira wanted to research it more, find out what it meant. But then she died and I didn't want to look. Didn't want to know if there was something in my blood that made me different. Dangerous. Lunacrest wolves could manipulate mate bonds, Cashin said quietly, and there was something new in his voice. Not fear, but wariness. They were the only bloodline capable of refusing the moon's marks. Breaking fate connections. Rewriting bonds entirely. Karen nodded, misery welling up. That's why the sanctuary worked, isn't it? Why the mate mark went dormant instead of fighting the override. Because some part of my bloodline recognized a choice being made and allowed it. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Karen waited for Cashin to recoil, to tell her she was too dangerous to protect, that her very existence violated natural law. The Lunacrest wolves had been feared as much as revered, their ability to rewrite fate seen as an affront to the moon herself. Instead, Cashin stepped closer, closing the distance between them until Karen could feel the heat of his body, could smell that dark scent of winter and power. That's why Blackmore wanted you, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Not because the moon ordained it, but because someone discovered what you are. A Lunacrest descendant who could be bound, controlled, used. Your bloodline isn't just rare, Karen. It's valuable. And if Blackmore knows what you carry, then he won't stop until he has me back. Karen's voice cracked. This isn't just about refusing a mate bond. It's about something bigger. Yes. Cashin's hand lifted, and this time when he touched her, it was deliberate. His fingers traced the mate mark on her wrist, following the silver and black pattern with careful precision. Which means we're not just fighting to prove he killed your sister. We're fighting to keep you out of the hands of someone who would use you to reshape the entire supernatural hierarchy. Karen's breath caught as power flickered where his skin touched hers. Not painful, but significant. Like two forces recognizing each other, ancient and inevitable. I'm afraid, she whispered, admitting what she hadn't let herself feel until now. I don't know how to be what I am. I don't know if I can survive this. Cashin's other hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Then you'll learn, he said simply. And while you do, you'll be under my protection. Not because you sat on my throne, not because of some archaic corporate law, but because you're the first person in over a century who looked at me and saw sanctuary instead of a weapon. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers, his voice dropping to something that might have been a promise. I won't let him touch you, Karen Webb. Not Blackmore, not anyone who would use what you are against you. That's not a political calculation or a corporate decision. That's my word. And standing there in the darkness, caught between the alpha who'd claimed her and the bloodline she'd spent her whole life hiding, Karen felt something shift inside her chest. Not submission. Not fate. Choice. The archives were buried 6 floors below Nightfall Tower, hidden behind security protocols and layers of corporate bureaucracy that most employees didn't know existed. Cashin led Karen through the maze of corridors in the pre-dawn hours, when the building was nearly empty and the fluorescent lights hummed with lonely persistence. She'd slept for maybe 2 hours after their conversation, her mind too full of revelations and implications to find real rest. When Cashin knocked on her door at 5 in the morning, she'd already been awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile what she'd admitted about her bloodline with the reality of her ordinary life. The archives contain records from before Nightfall Holdings existed, Cashin explained as they descended in a service elevator that required his biometric authorization. When this city was just scattered pack territories and corporate law hadn't merged with supernatural governance. If your maternal line traces to Lunacrest, there should be documentation. Genealogies, power assessments, territorial claims. Karen pulled her borrowed jacket tighter. Cashin had provided clothes that actually fit, expensive and perfectly tailored in a way that made her uncomfortable. Why help me research this? Wouldn't it be easier to just not know? Ignorance doesn't protect you. It just makes you vulnerable. He glanced at her as the elevator doors opened onto a dimly lit hallway. If Blackmore knows what you are, or even suspects, then others will find out eventually. Better to understand your bloodline before someone tries to use it against you. The archive's entrance was marked by a heavy steel door with a biometric scanner that looked military-grade. Cashin pressed his palm to it, and something inside the wall hummed as mechanisms unlocked. The door swung open with a sound like a bank vault, revealing a space that took Karen's breath away. It wasn't a sterile records room. It was a cathedral to supernatural history. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by pillars carved with symbols that predated written language. Shelves stretched endlessly in every direction, filled with leather-bound volumes, scrolls sealed with wax, metal tablets etched with ancient script. The air smelled of old paper and preservation magic, and Karen's wolf stirred with recognition, sensing the weight of centuries contained in this space. This is... She breathed, unable to finish the sentence. The collective memory of our kind, Cashin said quietly. He moved into the stacks with the confidence of someone who knew every corner, every shelf. Before supernatural corporations, before pack councils formalized their laws, we kept records the old way. Physical documentation, witnessed and sealed. The archives hold treaties, bloodline registries, territorial disputes, power manifestations. Everything that shapes what we are. Karen followed him deeper into the labyrinth, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Who has access to this? Very few. The Alpha. Senior council members. Certain academic researchers with special clearance. He paused at an intersection of shelves, scanning the spines with practiced efficiency. And now you, because you're under my protection, and what we find here directly concerns your safety. They moved through sections labeled in languages Karen didn't recognize, past shelves that hummed with protective wards. Finally, Cashin stopped in a corner that felt older than the rest, where the shelves were made of dark wood instead of metal, and the books looked like they might crumble if touched too roughly. Lunacrest Territory, 1687 to 1702, he read from a faded label. The years before the fall. He pulled down a volume carefully, its leather cover embossed with a symbol that made Karen's chest tighten with inexplicable recognition. A crescent moon cradled inside a blooming flower, the Lunacrest sigil. Cashin carried the book to a reading table positioned beneath a shaft of soft light. When he opened it, the pages released a scent of lavender and something else, something that smelled like moonlight if moonlight had a scent. The text was handwritten, elegant script in ink that had faded to sepia. Cashin's finger traced the lines as he read, and Karen watched his expression shift from neutral interest to something more intense. The Lunacrest wolves weren't just capable of refusing mate bonds, he said after a long moment. They were moonblood. Direct descendants of the first shifters, those who received their gifts straight from the goddess before bloodlines diluted and diversified. Karen leaned over his shoulder, trying to decipher the archaic language. What does that mean? It means your ancestors didn't just follow the moon's will, they could speak back to her. Question her choices. Negotiate with fate itself. Cashin turned a page, revealing an illustration that made Karen's breath catch. A female wolf surrounded by silver flame, her hands raised toward a full moon that seemed to be listening. Lunacrest wolves could see the threads of destiny. Not just their own bonds, but everyone's. They served as mediators when mate bonds went wrong, when the moon's matches caused suffering instead of completion. I've never been able to do that, Karen whispered. I'm not special. I'm just untrained. Cashin looked up at her, and his pale eyes held something that might have been excitement. Lunacrest abilities manifested gradually, usually triggered by extreme emotional stress or proximity to broken bonds. Your sister's death. The forced bond with Blackmore. The sanctuary claim. You've been under constant pressure for 2 years, and your bloodline has been waking up in response. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. That's why the mate mark went dormant. Why the sanctuary worked when it shouldn't have. My bloodline was, what? Fighting back. Protecting you. Cashin turned another page, revealing more text and a genealogy chart that branched like a tree. Lunacrest wolves were pacifists by nature. They avoided violence, settled conflicts through mediation, used their bond site to prevent wars before they started. But they were also fiercely protective of free will. The idea of forced bonds, of fate overriding choice, was anathema to everything they believed. He traced one line on the genealogy chart, following it down through generations until it ended in a name that made Karen's heart stop. Elena Lunacrest, born 1689. Bonded to Marcus Thorne, 1707. Disappeared during the fall, 1702. Status, unknown. Thorne, Karen breathed. That's your maternal grandmother's maiden name, Cashin finished. I checked the employment records after you mentioned your bloodline. Your mother was Sarah Thorne before she took the web name in bonding. Karen stared at the name, at the word disappeared, at the date that marked the end of an entire territory. What happened? Why did Lunacrest fall? Cashin's jaw tightened. Politics. Fear. The other territories saw Lunacrest's power as a threat. If wolves could refuse mate bonds, could rewrite destiny, then what else might they change? Pack hierarchies? Dominant structures? The entire social order that kept powerful alphas in control. So they destroyed them. Karen's voice was hollow. They tried. Cashin pulled down another volume, this one bound in black leather with silver clasps. The fall of Lunacrest was officially recorded as a plague. A supernatural virus that killed most of the population and scattered the survivors. But there are other accounts. Witness testimonies sealed and buried. This is one of them. He opened the book to a page marked with a strip of faded ribbon. The text was different here, hasty, emotional, written by someone who'd witnessed horror. They came at night, Cashin read aloud, his voice carefully neutral. 7 packs allied under false pretenses of protection. They claimed the moon blood had grown too powerful, that their ability to manipulate bonds threatened natural order. They burned the sacred groves, killed the elders, hunted down anyone who carried the bloodline strongly enough to manifest powers. Karen felt sick. And the survivors? Scattered. Hid their heritage. Married into other packs and diluted the bloodline until it became background noise in their genetics. Cashin looked at her, and his expression was grim. Your great-great-grandmother Elena was one of the survivors. She fled with her bonded mate, changed her name, lived quietly for decades. By the time your grandmother was born, the Lunacrest powers were dormant enough that no one noticed. By the time your mother came along, they were barely a whisper. Until me. Karen's voice cracked. Until Kira. Your sister manifested too, didn't she? Cashin closed the book carefully. That's what Blackmore really discovered. Not just financial fraud, but what she was. What you both were. Karen nodded, the pieces finally falling into horrible place. Kira told me she'd been having dreams. Visions of silver threads connecting people, bonds that glowed or flickered or went dark. She thought she was losing her mind. We both did. We didn't know what it meant. Bonsite, Cashin said softly. The first manifestation of Lunacrest power. She was seeing the mate bonds around her, probably sensing which ones were healthy and which were corrupt. And if she saw Blackmore's bond, if she realized he was manipulating connections or using bond-breaking magic for his schemes, Karen couldn't finish the sentence. The horror was too large. Then she became a threat that had to be eliminated. Cashin stood, moving to another shelf and pulling down more volumes. Blackmore didn't just kill your sister to hide financial crimes. He killed her because she could expose what he really was. And then he arranged for you to be marked as his mate, probably using the same bond manipulation magic Kira discovered, so he could control the last living Lunacrest descendant. The room spun slightly and Karen gripped the table for balance. Everything she'd believed about her sister's death, about the mate bond, about her own identity was reshaping itself into something darker and more complex. The moon didn't choose Blackmore for me, she whispered. He chose himself. Using stolen Lunacrest techniques to forge a false bond. Cashin's voice was cold with fury. Which means somewhere in his possession, he has Lunacrest artifacts or knowledge. Probably taken from your sister after he killed her. Karen's grief crystallized into something sharper. We need to find it. Whatever he took from Kira, whatever he's using. We will. Cashin returned to the table with 3 more books, spreading them open to reveal maps, diagrams, and text written in languages Karen didn't know. But first, you need to understand what you're capable of. If your bloodline has been waking up, if the bond site is manifesting, then you have other abilities too. Ones that could protect you if Blackmore comes for you directly. I don't know how to do any of this, Karen said desperately. I'm not some ancient Moonblood warrior. I'm a legal analyst who can barely control her shift when she's stressed. Then we train you. Cashin's hand covered hers where it gripped the table, and his touch sent warmth through her skin. The archives contain more than just history. They contain the training methods the Lunacrest wolves used to develop their abilities. Meditation techniques, bond exercises, ways to strengthen your connection to the moon herself. Karen looked at their hands, his scarred and powerful, hers small and trembling, and felt the enormity of what he was offering. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have just kept me locked in your penthouse, maintained the sanctuary without getting personally involved. Why help me become stronger? Cashin was quiet for a long moment, his thumb brushing absently over her knuckles. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because I know what it's like to have power you didn't ask for and no one to teach you how to control it. I know what it's like to be seen as a weapon instead of a person, to have your very existence feared by everyone around you. His pale eyes met hers, and Karen saw something raw in them. The nightbound curse that suppresses my emotions isn't natural, Karen. It was done to me. Forced on me by pack elders who decided I was too powerful, too dangerous to feel fully. They broke something inside me and called it protection. Karen's breath caught. Cashin. So when I see someone else being shaped by forces they didn't choose, being hunted for bloodline gifts they never asked for, I recognize it. His hand tightened on hers. And I remember what it felt like to wish someone had helped me before the damage was permanent. The vulnerability in his admission was staggering. This was the alpha who'd ruled the city with cold efficiency, who everyone said couldn't feel emotion, who existed above human connection. But here in the archives, surrounded by the ghosts of dead bloodlines and fallen territories, he was just someone who'd been hurt and wanted to prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. Karen turned her hand over, threading her fingers through his. Then teach me. Show me how to access whatever my bloodline can do. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of being powerless. If I'm Moonblood, if I carry this legacy, then I want to use it. Something that might have been pride flickered across Cashin's face. It won't be easy. Lunacrest training required complete honesty with yourself, confronting fears and wounds you've buried. You'll have to face everything you've been running from. I've been facing Kira's death for 2 years. I've been confronting what I am since the moment that mate mark appeared. Karen's voice steadied. I'm not afraid of hard truths anymore. I'm afraid of staying weak while someone like Blackmore uses people like us as pawns. Cashin studied her for a heartbeat longer, then nodded. Then we start tonight. After sunset, when the moon is visible. The sacred grove that used to sit at the heart of Lunacrest territory is preserved in a pocket dimension beneath the archives. I'll take you there, and we'll see what your bloodline remembers. He released her hand and began gathering the books, but Karen caught his arm before he could move away. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me as more than a problem to solve. For believing I could be something other than a victim. Cashin's expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face. You were never just a victim, Karen. You walked across that summit hall and claimed your own fate. That takes a kind of courage most wolves never find. I'm just helping you understand what you were always capable of. As they left the archives, carrying armfuls of ancient books and forbidden knowledge, Karen felt something shift inside her chest. Not the mate bond, not the mark on her wrist, something deeper. Like a door that had been locked her entire life was finally beginning to open. And behind it, silver moonlight was waiting. The corporate boardroom on the 42nd floor of Nightfall Tower smelled like expensive coffee and barely concealed hostility. Karen sat beside Cashin at the obsidian conference table, hyper-aware of every eye in the room tracking her presence. She wore one of the tailored suits Cashin had provided, charcoal gray, perfectly fitted, armor disguised as professional attire. But no amount of expensive clothing could hide what she was, the low-ranking wolf who disrupted pack hierarchy and claimed sanctuary from an ordained mate. 7 pack leaders occupied the other seats, each representing different territories within the city's supernatural ecosystem. Karen recognized most of them from summit gatherings, Alpha Meridian Cross of the East Side Pack, her silver hair pulled back in a severe knot. Alpha Victor Kane from the Industrial District, built like a freight train and twice as subtle. Alpha Sarah Nightshade of the Arts Quarter, beautiful and venomous in equal measure. And at the far end of the table, looking perfectly composed despite the chaos Karen had caused, sat Ronan Blackmore. He wasn't technically an alpha, not yet, but his presence at this council meeting spoke volumes about his political connections. He changed from his summit attire into a dark suit that made him look like every other corporate predator, but Karen could see the calculation in his eyes. The same look he'd worn at Kira's funeral. This is unprecedented, Meridian Cross said, her voice sharp as broken glass. She directed her words at Cashin, not Karen, as if acknowledging Karen's presence would give it validity. Corporate sanctuary hasn't been invoked in over 70 years, and never to override an ordained mate bond. The council has serious concerns about the precedent this sets. Cashin's expression remained perfectly neutral, but Karen felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. The law is clear. Article 7 of the Founding Charter allows any wolf to claim protection from a more dominant alpha in cases of genuine threat. Miss Webb met all the requirements. Genuine threat from her chosen mate? Victor Kane's laugh was harsh. The moon doesn't make mistakes, Dreven. If she marked them as compatible. The moon's wisdom is not in question, Cashin interrupted, his voice quiet but absolutely final. But nor is my authority to grant sanctuary when properly requested. Unless you'd like to challenge the Founding Charter itself. Silence fell, heavy and dangerous. No one wanted to question the founding documents. Doing so would undermine the entire corporate structure that gave them power. But Karen could see the frustration in their faces, the anger at having their comfortable hierarchy disrupted by a wolf they'd barely noticed before. Perhaps we should hear from the rejected mate, Sarah Nightshade suggested, her smile cold. Ronan has been remarkably patient given the public humiliation he endured. I think we all deserve to understand his perspective. Ronan inclined his head graciously, and when he spoke, his voice carried wounded dignity that made Karen's stomach turn. I hold no ill will toward Karen. The mate bond can be overwhelming, especially for wolves from modest backgrounds. I believe she panicked, made a rash decision without understanding the consequences. I'm willing to forgive this lapse in judgment if she's willing to return and honor the bond the moon intended. The magnanimity in his tone was a masterwork of manipulation. To everyone else in the room, he sounded reasonable, forgiving, the perfect mate willing to overlook his chosen's temporary madness. Only Karen could see the threat beneath the pretty words, the promise that if she came back, he would make her pay for every moment of public embarrassment. How generous, Karen said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. She felt Cashin's attention shift to her, a silent question about whether she wanted to engage. She did. She was done being silent. Except the bond wasn't ordained by the moon. It was manufactured. The room erupted. That's a serious accusation, Meridian Cross snapped. Bond manipulation is forbidden under supernatural law. If you're claiming, I'm claiming that Ronan Blackmore has access to Lunacrest bond-working techniques, Karen continued, her heart hammering but her voice clear. That he used them to forge a false mate mark, and that he did so to gain control over me specifically because of my bloodline. Victor Kane leaned forward, his expression dangerous. And what bloodline would that be? You're listed as Webpack, no notable heritage, Omega-rank genetics at best. She's Moonblood, Cashin said quietly, and the room went absolutely still. Descended from the Lunacrest line through her maternal grandmother, which makes her one of the last living wolves capable of true bondsight and fate manipulation. The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen watched realization dawn on faces around the table, understanding of why Ronan would want her, why Cashin would protect her, why this situation was so much more complicated than a simple sanctuary claim. Sarah Nightshade recovered first, her expression calculating. Lunacrest fell centuries ago. The bloodline is extinct. Clearly not, Cashin replied. And if Blackmore discovered what Miss Webb carried, it would explain his sudden interest in a wolf he'd previously ignored. It would also explain why he might resort to bond manipulation to secure a connection the moon would never have ordained naturally. Ronan's composure finally cracked, just slightly. His jaw tightened, and something dark flickered in his eyes. This is absurd. You're telling fairy tales to justify keeping another alpha's mate. I'm not your mate. Karen's voice cut through his protest like a blade. And you know it. The same way you knew my sister wasn't losing control during that training exercise. The same way you knew exactly what to take from her body after you killed her. The accusation hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Ronan's face went carefully blank, but not before Karen saw the flash of recognition. He knew that she knew. Had probably always known that she suspected, had been waiting for her to try something so he could discredit her as a grief-stricken sister making wild claims. Kira Webb's death was investigated thoroughly, Meridian Cross said, her tone suggesting the matter was closed. The incident report was filed by the man who killed her, Karen interrupted. Filed, approved, and buried under corporate immunity. But I have evidence. Financial records showing fraud. Witness testimony. Testimony from whom? Victor Kane demanded. Because I've reviewed that incident file personally. Every witness confirmed Blackmore's account. One witness tried to recant, Karen said, her voice shaking slightly. Marcus Thorne. He approached me 6 months ago, said he wanted to tell the truth about what really happened. Then he disappeared before he could give a formal statement. She saw several of the alphas exchange glances. Marcus Thorne was known to them, a reliable enforcer, not someone prone to deception or instability. His sudden transfer and silence would have raised questions if anyone had bothered to ask them. Even if we entertain this theory, Sarah Nightshade said carefully, witness testimony about a supposed murder and claims about forged mate bonds are two very different accusations. You're asking us to believe that Ronan not only killed your sister, but also has access to extinct Lunacrest magic. That's provable, Cashin interjected. If Blackmore possesses Lunacrest artifacts or knowledge, they would show specific signatures under the right examination. I'm formally requesting a search of his personal effects and corporate accounts under the security protocols outlined in. Absolutely not. Ronan's voice was cold now, the charming facade dropped entirely. You're using your position to harass me because a low-ranking wolf made wild accusations to justify breaking a sacred bond. This is a witch hunt, and I won't tolerate. Then you won't mind submitting to a voluntary examination, Cashin said smoothly. If you have nothing to hide, if the mate bond is genuine and Miss Webb's claims are baseless, a simple magical audit will clear your name entirely. The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. If Ronan agreed, he'd be subjected to scrutiny that might reveal his stolen knowledge. If he refused, he'd look guilty, defensive, like someone with secrets to protect. Ronan's smile returned, but it was sharp enough to cut. I'll agree to an examination under one condition. If the audit finds no evidence of bond manipulation or stolen Lunacrest techniques, Miss Webb returns to honor the mate bond she so publicly rejected. And Alpha Driven formally apologizes for abusing his authority to interfere with moon-ordained connections. Karen felt her blood go cold. It was a calculated risk, Ronan betting that whatever evidence existed was well enough hidden that a standard audit wouldn't find it. And if he won, Karen would be bound to him with the full support of the Pack Council, unable to claim sanctuary again. No deal, Cashin said flatly. Then we're at an impasse. Ronan leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. And the council will have to decide whether they believe unsupported accusations from a traumatized wolf, or whether they support the natural order the moon herself established. Meridian Cross's expression was troubled, but her voice remained firm. This council cannot and will not override an ordained mate bond without substantial proof of manipulation. If Alpha Driven wishes to maintain sanctuary for Miss Webb, he must provide evidence within 30 days. Otherwise, the bond must be honored. 30 days isn't enough time to, Karen started, but Cashin's hand on her arm stopped her. 30 days is acceptable, he said calmly. But during that time, Miss Webb remains under my protection. No contact attempts from Blackmore or his associates. No pack summons, no bond-calling rituals, nothing that might influence the investigation. The Alphas conferred quietly among themselves, then Meridian nodded. Agreed. 30 days. But Alpha Driven, be warned, if you cannot substantiate these claims, this council will expect you to release Miss Webb to her proper mate. Sanctuary was never intended to circumvent the moon's will indefinitely. Understood. Cashin stood, and Karen rose with him, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. We'll provide our evidence within the deadline. As they turned to leave, Ronan's voice followed them, soft and poisonous. Karen, when this is over and you come back to me, we're going to have a very long conversation about loyalty, about respect, about what happens to wolves who embarrass their mates in front of the entire supernatural community. Karen's wolf snarled in her chest, but she forced herself to keep walking, to not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Cashin's hand remained on her lower back, steady and grounding, as they left the boardroom and headed for the private elevator. Only when the doors closed and they were alone did Karen let herself breathe. That was a disaster, she whispered, her hands shaking. 30 days. We'll never find enough evidence in 30 days, and if we don't, we will. Cashin's voice was absolute certainty. Because Blackmore made a mistake. He got defensive, tried to flip the situation instead of simply denying the accusations. That tells me we're close to something he desperately wants to keep hidden. But what? We don't know where he's keeping whatever he took from Kira. We don't even know what it is, artifacts, documents, tools. We know it's Lunacrest. Cashin turned to face her, and his pale eyes burned with intensity. And we know that Lunacrest magic responds to Moonblood. If he has artifacts, if he's been using them, they'll recognize you. Your bloodline will call to them the same way they call to you. Karen's breath caught. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as a weapon, Cashin corrected. Tonight, we start your training in the sacred grove. We wake up whatever abilities your bloodline carries. And then we go hunting for the magic Blackmore stole from your sister. The elevator opened onto the executive floor, but before they could step out, Cashin's phone buzzed with an urgent alert. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. What is it? Security breach. Someone's trying to access the archives. His jaw tightened. And they're using authorization codes that were tied to your sister's employee credentials. Karen's heart stopped. That's impossible. Kira's access was revoked when she died. Unless someone copied her codes before she was killed. Cashin was already moving, pulling Karen back into the elevator and hitting the button for the archive level. Someone who knew she'd been researching Lunacrest records. Someone who wanted to see what she'd found. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Ronan. He's not just using what he took from Kira. He's still looking for more. Still trying to understand what she discovered about the bloodline. Which means he'll know we were just there, Cashin said grimly. Know that we're researching your heritage. This wasn't an impasse in that boardroom, Karen. This was a declaration of war. The elevator descended rapidly, and Karen felt her wolf rising to the surface, silver fire kindling in her veins. For 2 years, she'd been reactive, defensive, gathering evidence in secret while Ronan moved freely through his stolen power. But something had changed. Maybe it was the training waiting for her in the sacred grove. Maybe it was the books they'd pulled from the shelves, the genealogy charts that proved she was more than what she'd been raised to believe. Maybe it was simply the fact that Cashin Dreven, the most powerful alpha in the city, stood beside her and saw her as something worth fighting for. Whatever the reason, Karen felt the fear that had controlled her for so long transforming into something sharper. Rage. Not the wild, destructive kind, the cold, focused fury that came from finally understanding the shape of your enemy and deciding you were done running. When the elevator doors opened onto the archive level, Karen didn't hesitate. She stepped out into the corridor, silver flame flickering at her fingertips like her bloodline was finally waking up after centuries of sleep. Let him come, she said quietly, her voice carrying a resonance that didn't quite sound human. Let him try to take what's mine. Because I'm done being prey. Cashin moved beside her, matching her stride, and when he spoke, there was something in his voice that might have been pride. Then let's show him what happens when you hunt a Mooblood. Together, they moved through the shadows toward the archives, toward whatever confrontation waited in the darkness, and Karen felt destiny shifting around her like a living thing. The moon was watching. And this time, she was ready to answer. The sacred grove existed in a place between worlds. Cashin had led Karen through a hidden door at the back of the archives, down a spiral staircase carved from stone that predated the city itself. The air grew warmer as they descended, thick with magic that made Karen's skin tingle and her wolf pace restlessly. By the time they reached the bottom, she could barely remember what the fluorescent-lit corridors above felt like. The grove sprawled before them, impossible and perfect. Ancient trees with silver bark grew from soil that glowed faintly in the darkness, their branches heavy with blossoms that shimmered like captured starlight. A stream ran through the center, its water so clear it looked like liquid crystal, and overhead, despite being buried beneath 6 floors of concrete and steel, the full moon hung luminous and close enough to touch. This is a pocket dimension, Cashin explained, his voice soft with something that might have been reverence. Created by the Lunacrest wolves 3 centuries ago. When their territory fell, the grove was preserved here, locked away from time and destruction. Only those with moon blood can enter without the space rejecting them. Karen stepped onto the grass, and the moment her feet touched the ground, she felt it, a rush of recognition so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Her bloodline knew this place. Had been born in soil like this, had learned to shift beneath trees like these, had sung to the moon in voices that carried across centuries. I can feel them, she whispered, her voice cracking. My ancestors. They're here somehow, in the earth, in the air. Their essence is woven into the grove itself, Cashin said. He moved to the center of the clearing, where a circular stone platform was carved with symbols that glowed faintly silver. This is where they trained. Where young moon blood learned to see the threads of fate and understand the bonds that connected all wolves. Karen followed him to the platform, her heart racing. The security breach in the archives had turned out to be nothing, a glitch in the system that had triggered Kira's old authorization codes randomly. But the false alarm had rattled both of them, made them realize how vulnerable they were with Ronan circling closer. Now, standing in this sacred space, Karen felt the weight of everything pressing down. 30 days to prove Ronan had manipulated her bond. 30 days to find evidence of murder. 30 days before she was forced back into the arms of the wolf who'd destroyed her sister. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, the fear finally breaking through. "Everyone keeps telling me I'm Moonblood, that I have these powers, but I'm just me. Just Karen who can barely control her shift when she's emotional. What if there's nothing there? What if my bloodline is too diluted, too weak? Then you'll still be the wolf who walked across that summit hall and claimed her own fate," Cashin interrupted. He stood in the center of the platform, moonlight painting him in shades of silver and shadow. "Power isn't what makes you worthy of protection, Karen. Courage is. And you've already shown more of that than most wolves find in a lifetime." His words settled something in her chest, but the doubt remained. She climbed onto the platform beside him, feeling the stone warm beneath her feet, and tried to quiet the voice in her head that said she would fail everyone who believed in her. "How does this work?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "The training. You have to open yourself to the moon," Cashin said. "Stop fighting what you feel. Stop hiding what you are." Lunacrest training required absolute honesty, with yourself, with your fears, with every wound you've buried. Only then can the bonsite manifest. Karen's throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm ready to face all of that." "No one ever is." Cashin's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with surprising gentleness. "But you don't have to do it alone. I'll guide you through the meditation, help you find the threads. And if it becomes too much, if the memories or emotions overwhelm you, I'll pull you back." There was something in his touch that made Karen's wolf settle, some quality of safety that she hadn't expected from an alpha rumored to be emotionless. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw the scars that marked not just his hands, but his neck, his jaw, burns that looked deliberately inflicted. "The Nightbound curse," she said softly, understanding dawning. "They did that to you. Burned away your ability to feel." Cashin's expression flickered, and for a moment she saw past the controlled mask to the raw wound beneath. "They called it a binding ritual. Said my emotions made me unstable, that I was too powerful to feel fully without destroying everything around me. So they brought me to a sacred place much like this one, and they used ancient magic to sever the connections between my wolf and my heart." Karen's free hand lifted without conscious thought, her fingers tracing the burn scars on his jaw. "How old were you?" 23. His voice was barely audible. "Young enough to believe the alphas who raised me when they said it was necessary. That I was dangerous. That this was the only way to keep everyone safe. And now? Now I've lived a century with half my soul locked away, watching the world through glass, unable to fully feel joy or grief or love." His hand covered hers where it rested against his face. "So when I tell you that facing your buried wounds is worth the pain, I speak from experience. Because I know what it costs to keep running from what you are." The vulnerability in his admission broke something open in Karen's chest. She'd thought Cashin was untouchable, unreachable, a force of nature rather than a person. But here in the moonlight, with his scars under her fingers and centuries of loneliness in his eyes, he was just someone who'd been hurt by people who should have protected him. Like her. Like Kira. Like every wolf who'd ever been shaped by forces they didn't choose. "Teach me," Karen whispered, her voice steady despite the fear. "Show me how to stop running." Cashin nodded slowly, then guided her to sit on the platform, their knees touching as they faced each other. The stream burbled softly nearby, and the silver blossoms overhead swayed in a breeze that didn't quite exist. "Close your eyes," he said, his voice dropping into a cadence that felt ancient, ritual. "Feel the moonlight on your skin. Let it sink into your bones, into your blood. The moon sees everything, every fear you hide, every wound you carry, every truth you've buried. You can't lie to her, so stop trying." Karen let her eyes drift closed, focusing on the warmth of the moon above and the solid presence of Cashin's hands holding hers. At first, there was only darkness and the sound of her own breathing. But gradually, she began to sense something else, threads of light in the blackness, silvery and gossamer thin, connecting everything in the grove. What do you see? Cashin's voice was distant, echoing. Threads, Karen breathed. Everywhere. Connecting the trees, the water, the earth. Those are life bonds. The connections between living things. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles, grounding. Now look deeper. Past the surface connections to the ones that bind souls together. Karen pushed her awareness further, and suddenly the threads multiplied, became a web so complex it made her dizzy. Some glowed bright and steady, pulsing with health. Others flickered weakly. And a few were dark, corrupted, twisted into shapes that made her wolf whimper with instinctive horror. I see them, she gasped. The mate bonds. Some are beautiful, but others, Cashin, some of them are wrong. Poisoned. Those are the bonds that cause suffering instead of completion, he said quietly. Matches made by manipulation or force, connections that should never have formed. Can you see your own? Karen's awareness turned inward, searching for the thread that should connect her to Ronan. She found it, a black, oily thing wrapped around her wrist, pulsing with wrongness. But beside it, overlaying it like a shield, was something else. A bond that glowed pale silver blue, stretching from her too. Her eyes flew open. Cashin. There's a bond between us. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes. The sanctuary claim created a dominance bond. It's not romantic or fated, just a connection between alpha and protected. You should be able to see it clearly. But that wasn't what Karen saw. The thread connecting her to Cashin wasn't the harsh, commanding thing she'd expect from a dominance bond. It was gentle, curious, glowing with potential like a seed that hadn't yet decided what to grow into. That's not a dominance bond, she said, her voice shaking. Don't. Cashin's hands tightened on hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, she heard something like fear in his voice. Don't look too closely at what's forming between us. Not yet. Not when you're still marked for someone else. Not when I'm still. He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Still what? Still cursed, he finished roughly. Still unable to feel what that bond might mean. If you see something growing there, it's one-sided, Karen. I can't give you what you might be hoping for. But he was wrong. Karen could see both threads now, hers reaching toward him, bright and yearning, and his reaching back, pale and tentative and fighting against bonds that had been burned into him a century ago. The nightbound curse was wrapped around his heart like chains, but tiny fractures had formed in the metal. Places where warmth was beginning to leak through. You're feeling more than you think you are, Karen said softly. I can see it in the bond. The curse is breaking, Cashin. Slowly, but it's breaking. He pulled his hands away and stood abruptly, putting distance between them. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled again, the vulnerability locked away. We're not here to examine my bonds. We're here to train you. The deflection hurt more than it should have. Karen stood as well, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. You have nothing to apologize for. Cashin's back was to her, his shoulders rigid. But you need to understand something. Whatever you think you see forming between us, whatever potential exists, it can't matter. Because if I let myself care, if I let those fractures widen and the curse shatters, there's no telling what I'll become. The emotions I've held back for a century will come flooding through all at once. It could destroy me. Could destroy everyone around me. Karen moved closer, though she didn't touch him. Or it could save you. You don't know that. He turned to face her, and his expression was raw with something that looked like anguish. What you're seeing in that bond is hope, Karen. And hope is the most dangerous thing I can allow myself to feel. The moment hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Cashin's phone buzzed, a harsh and intrusive in the sacred quiet of the grove. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. What is it? Message from Marcus Thorne. Cashin's voice was tight. He's willing to testify about your sister's death. But he says he'll only meet with you, and it has to be tonight. Karen's heart leapt and sank simultaneously. Marcus could give them everything they needed: witness testimony, concrete evidence, proof that Ronan had murdered Kira. But after 6 months of silence, why surface now? Why tonight, hours after the council meeting where they'd publicly accused Ronan? It's a trap, she whispered. Probably. Cashin was already moving, heading for the spiral staircase that would take them back to the real world. But we don't have 30 days to gather evidence the careful way. If there's even a chance Marcus is genuine, we have to take it. Karen followed him, her training forgotten in the face of this new crisis. But as she climbed the stairs away from the sacred grove, she felt the bond site still active in her mind, and she couldn't help glancing back at the thread connecting her to Cashin. It glowed brighter now, pulsing with something that looked very much like fear. Not of the trap they were walking into, but of what might happen if either of them didn't make it back. The warehouse district at midnight was exactly the kind of place where bad decisions ended in blood. Karen stood beside Cashin in the shadows outside the abandoned shipping facility where Marcus Thorne had agreed to meet, every instinct screaming that this was wrong. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti that glowed faintly with residual magic. The air smelled like rust and old violence. "We don't have to do this," Cashin said for the 3rd time since they'd left Nightfall Tower. "Marcus could meet us anywhere. The fact that he chose this location means he's afraid of being seen," Karen interrupted. "If Ronan knows he tried to contact me before, Marcus has every reason to be paranoid. And if there's even a chance he'll testify, then we're walking into exactly what Blackmore wants." Cashin's hand rested on her lower back, the touch protective and possessive simultaneously. "Stay close to me. Don't let anyone separate us. And if I tell you to run, you run." "Understood." Karen wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't some helpless thing that needed constant protection. But she'd seen enough in the bonsite training to know that Cashin's concern came from a place deeper than dominance. The thread connecting them had been glowing steadily brighter since they left the grove, and she could feel his worry through it like a physical thing. They entered the warehouse through a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the space was cavernous and dark, broken only by moonlight streaming through holes in the roof. Industrial equipment lay abandoned throughout: rusted conveyor belts, empty shipping containers, machinery that hadn't run in decades. The perfect place for an ambush. "Marcus?" Karen called out, her voice echoing off the metal walls. "It's Karen Webb. You said you wanted to talk." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a figure emerged from behind a shipping container in the center of the space, tall, broad-shouldered, with the distinctive bearing of an enforcer. Marcus Thorne looked older than Karen remembered, his face drawn and his movements cautious. "You came," he said, his voice rough with something that sounded like relief. "I wasn't sure you would. Not after what happened last time." "You disappeared," Karen said, moving closer despite Cashin's warning pressure on her back. 6 months ago, you said you wanted to tell the truth about Kira, and then you vanished. I thought Ronan had killed me." Marcus laughed bitterly. "He wanted to. But he needed me compliant, not dead. So he used other methods to keep me quiet." He stepped fully into the moonlight, and Karen's breath caught. His neck was covered in scars, not the clean lines of a formal mark, but jagged, brutal things that looked like someone had tried to tear his throat out repeatedly. "Bond torture," Cashin said quietly, and his voice carried an edge of fury. "Someone has been using bond magic to inflict pain without leaving permanent damage. It's illegal under every supernatural law that exists." "Illegal only matters if someone enforces it," Marcus said. He looked at Cashin warily, then back to Karen. "I'm sorry. For disappearing. For not being brave enough to testify when you needed me to. But he said he'd do to my family what he did to your sister, and his voice broke. I have a daughter. She's only 12. I couldn't risk it." Karen felt tears sting her eyes. I understand. I'm not angry, Marcus. I just need to know what you saw. What really happened to Kira? Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled out a small recording device from his jacket. I documented everything. The real timeline of that day. What your sister told me before we went into the woods. What I heard when Blackmore followed her. He held out the device. This is everything. And I'll testify if you can promise me protection. For me and my family. You'll have it, Cashin said immediately. Corporate sanctuary for you and your daughter. I'll file the paperwork tonight. Relief washed over Marcus's face, and he extended the recording device toward Karen. She reached for it, and the world exploded into violence. Wolves poured out from every shadow, at least a dozen of them, their eyes glowing with predatory intent. But they weren't attacking Karen or Cashin. They surrounded Marcus, cutting him off from them, forming a barrier of teeth and muscle. And at the center of it all, walking out of the darkness, like he owned the warehouse and everything in it, was Ronan Blackmore. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking with genuine anguish. They have my daughter. They said they'd kill her if I didn't. Ronan's hand clamped over Marcus's shoulder, and the enforcer's words cut off in a choked gasp. You talk too much, Thorn. But I suppose that's why you were always useless for anything except brute force. Cashin moved in front of Karen instantly, his body a wall between her and the threat. Power rolled off him in waves that made the other wolves whimper and press flat against the floor. Let Marcus go. Whatever game you're playing, he's not part of it. But he is, Ronan said pleasantly, like they were discussing weather instead of torture and murder. He's been the perfect tool. Told me everything you've been researching in the archives. Every book you pulled, every genealogy you examined. The Sacred Grove, the Luna Crest training. You've been very busy helping my little runaway bride discover her heritage. Horror washed through Karen as understanding dawned. You didn't just glitch Kira's codes into the system. You had Marcus feeding you information the whole time. Give the girl a prize. Ronan's smile was vicious. Though in his defense, he didn't want to betray you. Required quite a lot of persuasion. His fingers dug into Marcus's shoulder hard enough to make the enforcer flinch. But when you threaten someone's child with bond torture, they become remarkably cooperative. Cashin's growl was subsonic, felt more than heard. You're admitting to using forbidden magic. To torturing a packmate. The council will. The council will do nothing, Ronan interrupted. Because I have 5 alpha witnesses who will testify that I'm here tonight to reclaim my mate. That you're the one using forbidden magic, training a Moonblood in techniques the other territories destroyed Lunacrest for possessing. That you're planning to use Karen's bond site to manipulate the entire supernatural hierarchy. The trap clicked fully into place, and Karen felt cold understanding wash through her. You're not here to threaten us. You're here to frame us. Smart girl. Ronan released Marcus, who crumpled to the ground, and began walking slowly toward them. The wolves in the shadows moved with him, maintaining formation. The council gave me 30 days to disprove your accusations. But why wait when I can simply prove you're the real threat? An emotionless alpha training a Moonblood in forbidden arts. A low-ranking wolf with delusions of power who refuses to accept her rightful mate. Together, you look like the beginning of a coup. Cashin's power surged, and several of the wolves yelped and scrambled backward. But Ronan didn't flinch, didn't slow. He just kept coming, confident and calculating. Here's what's going to happen, Ronan continued. You're going to release Karen from Sanctuary. She's going to come with me peacefully and honor the mate bond the moon ordained. And in exchange, I won't file charges against you for corruption, abuse of power, and attempting to resurrect Lunacrest techniques that were banned for good reason. No. The word left Karen's mouth before she could think. She stepped out from behind Cashin, ignoring his growled protest, and faced Ronan directly. You killed my sister because she discovered what you are. A thief who uses bond magic to manipulate and control. You murdered her and tried to steal her bloodline knowledge. And when that didn't work, you arranged for me to be marked as your mate so you could access Lunacrest power through me. Ronan's smile never faltered. Prove it. The recording will never see the light of day. Ronan gestured lazily, and one of his wolves melted into shadow, moving too fast for Karen to track. There was a crack of breaking plastic, and Marcus cried out as the recording device was crushed beneath a clawed foot. Oops. Technology is so fragile. Rage exploded through Karen's chest, hot and silver and ancient. Her wolf surged forward, and suddenly she was shifting, bones cracking and reforming, but it wasn't painful. It was euphoric. Power flooded her veins, and when the transformation completed, she wasn't her normal wolf form. She was something else. Her fur glowed silver white in the moonlight. Her eyes burned like molten metal. And when she snarled, the sound resonated with something that made every wolf in the warehouse except Cassian and Ronan collapse to their knees. Impossible, Ronan breathed, and for the first time, fear flickered in his expression. You're not trained. You shouldn't be able to manifest. Karen could see everything now. Every bond in the room, every connection between souls. Ronan's threads were black and twisted, wrapped around Marcus like chains, around his own wolves like leashes. And extending from him toward her was that poisonous bond, the false mate mark he'd forged using stolen Lunacrest magic. She could feel her bloodline responding, ancient knowledge flooding her consciousness. She could break that bond, could shatter it so completely that it would never form again. But doing so would require touching it, diving into the corruption, facing everything he'd done to Kira and to her. Cassian was beside her suddenly, his hand on her glowing silver fur. Don't do this alone. His voice anchored her, kept her from drowning in the rage and power. Through the bond sight, she saw his thread pulsing with fear, not for himself, but for her. The curse around his heart was cracking wider, emotion bleeding through despite decades of suppression. Together, she realized. They had to do this together. Karen shifted back to human form, Cassian's jacket somehow already around her shoulders before she was fully solid. She faced Ronan with silver fire still dancing in her eyes. You want to prove I'm dangerous? That I'm planning to overturn the hierarchy. Her voice resonated with power she was only beginning to understand. Fine. Let's show them exactly what a moonblood can do. She reached for the poison bond connecting her to Ronan, wrapped her consciousness around it, and pulled. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Images flooded the warehouse, not from Karen's mind, but from the bond itself. Memories trapped in the twisted magic Ronan had used to forge it. Everyone present saw what Karen saw. Kira in the woods, trying to leave the training exercise, saying she'd found evidence of bond manipulation and needed to report it. Ronan following her, his expression cold and calculated. The conversation where he offered her money, power, anything to keep quiet. Kira refusing, standing firm. And then Ronan shifting, attacking while her back was turned, using magic that burned silver-black to inflict wounds that looked like a wolf had gone feral. Marcus arriving too late, begging Ronan to stop. Ronan threatening Marcus's family if he ever spoke the truth. The memories continued, Ronan taking Lunacrest artifacts from Kira's body, teaching himself bond-working techniques from stolen documents, using that knowledge to manipulate the mate selection, to forge a mark that would bind Karen to him, to secure access to the only living bloodline that could give him true power over fate itself. When the visions finally released, every wolf in the warehouse was staring at Ronan with horror and disgust. Even his own wolves had backed away, their loyalty shattered by the truth they'd witnessed. Ronan's composure cracked completely. That's not, you can't, no one will believe a vision created by moon blood manipulation. I will. Cassian's voice cut through the protests like a blade. And so will the council, because bond memories can't be faked. What we just witnessed was pulled directly from the connection you forged. Your own magic betrayed you. Ronan's hand moved fast, desperate, reaching for something in his jacket. But he never completed the motion. Cassian moved faster than physics should allow, crossing the distance and slamming Ronan into the concrete floor hard enough to crack the foundation. You used forbidden magic to murder an employee under my protection, Cashin said, his voice devoid of emotion, but his eyes burning with something that looked very much like rage breaking through. You tortured a pack mate and threatened his child. You forged a false mate bond with a Moonblood and planned to use her for your own advancement. Ronan struggled, but Cashin's hand closed around his throat, not quite choking, but absolute in its dominance. And worst of all, Cashin continued, something cracking in his voice, you made me feel again. You made me care about someone enough that your existence threatens everything I've spent a century protecting myself from. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand trial before the full council. You're going to confess everything. And then you're going to spend the rest of your life in exile, powerless and forgotten. He released Ronan and stood, turning to Karen. The curse around his heart was fracturing rapidly now, cracks spreading like breaking ice, and through the bond sight she could see emotion flooding through fear, anger, protectiveness, and something else. Something that glowed bright and terrifying and beautiful. We need to leave, Cashin said, his voice unsteady. Before I lose control completely. Karen reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. Then lose control. I'm not afraid of what you might become. You should be. But his grip tightened on her hand, and together they walked past Ronan's broken form, past the wolves who were already calling the pack council, past Marcus, who whispered thank you through his tears. They stepped out into the midnight air, and above them the moon blazed bright enough to cast shadows. Behind them, the warehouse erupted with howls as the pack learned what had happened. As justice finally began to turn. And between them, the bond that had been forming since the moment Karen sat on Cashin's throne blazed to life, not ordained by fate, not forged by magic, but chosen freely by two souls who'd both been broken and refused to stay that way. 3 days after Ronan's exposure, the city erupted into chaos. The council had convened an emergency session. Ronan Blackmore was formally charged with murder, bond manipulation, and use of forbidden magic. Marcus Thorne's testimony, combined with the bond memories Karen had extracted, should have been enough to end it cleanly. But supernatural politics were never clean, and Ronan's allies, those who'd benefited from his schemes, who'd looked the other way while he climbed the ranks, weren't going down without a fight. They called it a coup attempt. Said that Cashin was using a Moonblood to consolidate power, that Karen's abilities threatened the natural order, that Lunacrest had fallen for good reason, and its techniques should remain buried. 5 pack leaders, those who valued hierarchy over justice, filed a formal challenge under the oldest laws that governed their kind. Dominance law. Trial by combat to determine who held rightful authority over the territory. Cashin stood in his penthouse office, staring at the formal challenge document, and for the first time since Karen had known him, he looked uncertain. The curse that had held his emotions in check for over a century was crumbling faster each day, and the feelings flooding through were overwhelming him. She could see it in the bond they shared: fear, rage, protectiveness, and beneath it all, something that terrified him more than any physical threat. Love. They're using the law against us, Cashin said quietly, his fingers clenching around the document hard enough to crumple the expensive paper. Dominance law states that any alpha can challenge for territory if they believe the current leader is unfit. And by training you in Lunacrest techniques, by openly defying mate bond conventions, I've given them the excuse they needed. Karen moved beside him, her hand finding his. Who issued the challenge? Victor Kane. With backing from 4 other alphas. Cashin's jaw tightened. They've formed a coalition. If I refuse the challenge, I forfeit my position and all corporate holdings transfer to them. If I accept and lose, the same thing happens. Either way, you lose sanctuary protection and become vulnerable to whatever pack claims you first. Then we fight. Karen's voice was steady despite the fear racing through her veins. You're the most powerful alpha in the city. You can. They're not challenging me to a fair fight. Cashin turned to face her fully, and the anguish in his eyes was devastating. They're using ascension rules. Ancient pack law that allows multiple challengers to fight simultaneously. Victor won't face me alone. He'll have the other 4 alphas attacking with him. 5 against 1, and the combat continues until I submit or die. The words hit like a physical blow. Karen had researched pack law extensively during her years gathering evidence against Ronin, but Ascension rules were archaic, brutal, designed for a time when territories were won through bloodshed and might made right. "That's murder disguised as tradition," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "The council can't allow. The council is divided. Half want this settled according to ancient law. The other half are too afraid of what you represent to intervene." Cashin's hand cupped her face with heartbreaking gentleness. "They see a Moonblood who can rewrite bonds, who glows silver when she shifts, who pulled memories from corrupted magic that should have been impossible to access. They see Lunacrest rising from the ashes, and it terrifies them. So they're willing to let you die to stop it." Yes, the single word carried a century of weariness. And I can't blame them entirely. Everything they fear about Lunacrest power is true. You could reshape the entire supernatural hierarchy, break every forced bond, rewrite every match the moon made poorly. The power you carry is revolutionary, Karen. World-changing. And change is the thing those in power fear most. Karen felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "When is the challenge?" "Tonight. Lunar Peak, when pack magic is strongest." Cashin's thumb brushed her cheek. "I'll fight. I'll do everything I can to survive. But you need to understand that if I fall, if they claim victory, you run. Don't try to help, don't fight back. Just run as far and fast as you can." "I'm not running." Karen's voice hardened with determination. "And you're not fighting alone. Karen." "The bond we share isn't finished forming," she interrupted, pressing her hand over his heart where she could feel the curse continuing to fracture. "I can see it in the bond site. Every day, every hour, more of your emotions are breaking through. You're becoming whole again, Cashin. But if you go into that fight while the curse is still half active, while you're caught between feeling everything and nothing, you'll be vulnerable. Unstable." His expression shifted to something like fear. "If the curse breaks completely during combat, I could lose control. Become the monster they always said I was. Or you could become something more." Karen stepped closer until they were breathing the same air. What if that's what they're really afraid of? Not a Moonblood who can rewrite bonds, but an alpha who can feel fully. Who chooses protection over dominance? Who rules through consent instead of fear? Cashin's control was visibly cracking, emotions bleeding through in waves. "You don't know what you're asking." A century of suppressed feelings all releasing at once. Joy, grief, rage, love, everything I haven't let myself experience. It could burn through me like wildfire. Could burn through everything around me. Then let it burn. Karen rose on her toes, her lips brushing his jaw near one of the burn scars. Let it burn away everything they did to you. Everything they tried to make you. And I'll be right there beside you, showing them what happens when a Moonblood and an alpha who can feel choose each other freely. His arms came around her suddenly, crushing her against his chest, and she felt the moment his control shattered completely. Emotion poured through the bond connecting them, a century of loneliness, decades of watching the world from behind glass, years of believing he was capable of nothing but destruction. And beneath it all, bright and terrifying and undeniable, was love so fierce it made her wolf howl with recognition. "I can't lose you," he whispered against her hair, his voice breaking. "I spent 100 years not caring about anything, and then you walked across that summit hall and sat on my throne, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want someone to survive. To need someone to stay. I can't go back to the emptiness, Karen. I can't. You won't." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, and she let him see everything she felt reflected in her own. "Because I choose you. Not because of sanctuary, not because of dominance bonds or pack law. I choose you, Cashin-driven, exactly as you are. Cursed or free, emotionless or overwhelmed, I choose you." The bond between them exploded into brilliant light, visible even without bond sight. Silver and pale blue, twining together like DNA helixes, forming something that had never existed before, a consent bond. Not ordained by the moon, not forged through magic, but created through pure choice between equals. And in that moment, the night-bound curse shattered completely. Cashin gasped as emotion flooded him, a century of feeling compressed into seconds. Karen caught him as his knees buckled, held him steady while his entire world reformed around sensations he'd forgotten existed. She could feel it all through their bond, the overwhelming rush of rediscovering what it meant to be fully alive. When he finally straightened, his eyes had changed. They were still pale silver blue, still held the weight of a century, but now they burned with something vital and fierce and wholly present. "Thank you," he breathed, the words carrying depths of meaning, "for not letting me stay broken." Before Karen could respond, the floor beneath them shook. Not an earthquake, something else. Power rolling through the building like a shockwave, making lights flicker and windows rattle. Cashin's phone erupted with alerts. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. They've started early. Victor and his coalition are at the ceremonial grounds with witnesses from the other packs. They're claiming I'm stalling, using the hours before lunar peak to flee. Then we go now. Karen's wolf was already rising to the surface, silver fire kindling in her veins. We face them together and show them exactly what they tried so hard to destroy. Cashin caught her hand, threading their fingers together. This is going to be brutal. They won't just try to defeat me, they'll try to kill me as an example. And if you're there, if they see you fighting beside me, they'll see what Lunacrest really was, Karen finished. Not conquerors or manipulators, but protectors. Wolves who believed in free will and consent and choosing your own fate. That's what terrifies them most, not power, but choice. He studied her for a long moment, and Karen saw calculation warring with emotion in his newly freed heart. Then he smiled, a real smile, genuine and devastating, and squeezed her hand. Then let's give them something to really be afraid of. The ceremonial grounds occupied the heart of the old pack territory, a massive clearing surrounded by ancient stones that predated the city itself. By the time Cashin and Karen arrived, hundreds of wolves had gathered, drawn by the scent of challenge and blood, by the promise of witnessing history reshape itself. Victor Kane stood at the center with his 4 allied alphas, Sarah Nightshade, Darius Wolfbane, Tobias Greymore, and Helena Stormcrest. All powerful, all ruthless, all wearing expressions that promised violence. They'd stripped to fighting forms already, human bodies built for combat, claws extended, eyes glowing with predatory anticipation. The crowd parted as Cashin and Karen walked through, their joined hands visible to everyone watching. Gasps and whispers followed them like a wake. Some wolves dropped their eyes in respect or fear. Others stared openly at Karen, sensing the power rolling off her in silver waves. Ronan was there too, standing in chains between pack enforcers, forced to witness the challenge that his exposure had triggered. When Karen's gaze met his, she saw hatred and defeat in equal measure. The mate mark on her wrist had vanished entirely, burned away when the consent bond with Cashin formed, and Ronan's face was a mask of impotent fury. "You're late, Dreven," Victor called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "We were beginning to think you'd chosen exile over combat." "I don't run from challenges," Cashin replied calmly. He released Karen's hand and stepped forward, rolling his shoulders with liquid grace. "Though 5 against 1 seems excessive even by dominance law standards. Are you really so afraid you need that much advantage?" Sarah Nightshade laughed, cold and beautiful. "We're not afraid of you, Alpha. We're being thorough. After tonight, no one will question our authority to reshape pack governance. Starting with what to do about uncontrolled moonbloods." Her gaze slid to Karen with undisguised threat. The message was clear: after they killed Cashin, Karen would be next. Or worse, she'd be claimed and controlled by whichever alpha proved strongest. "Ascension rules are clear," Darius Wolfbane said, his voice a rumble like thunder. Combat continues until the challenged alpha submits or ceases breathing. No sanctuary, no interference from outside parties. The moon blood stays outside the circle. He gestured to the ancient stones marking the boundary of the ceremonial space. Once the challenge began officially, no one could cross those lines except the combatants. If Karen tried to help, she'd be in violation of pack law, grounds for immediate execution. Cashin turned to look at Karen one last time, and through their bond she felt his fear not of death, but of leaving her unprotected. Of breaking the promise he'd made to keep her safe. "Trust me," she whispered, knowing he could hear despite the distance. "Trust what we are together." He nodded slightly, then turned back to the circle. Power rolled off him in waves that made the watching wolves whimper and press backward. The nightbound curse was gone, which meant his emotions were fully active, including rage at the injustice of this challenge, at the system that valued hierarchy over truth, at wolves who would rather destroy change than adapt to it. "Let's begin," he said quietly, and stepped across the stone boundary. The 5 alphas attacked simultaneously. It was brutal and efficient and clearly choreographed. They'd planned this assault, practiced it, knew exactly how to coordinate against a single opponent. Victor went for Cashin's throat while Sarah targeted his legs. Darius and Tobias flanked from both sides. Helena circled, waiting for an opening to strike at his back. Cashin moved like violence made flesh. He caught Victor's strike and used the alpha's momentum to throw him into Tobias. His claws raked across Sarah's side, drawing blood and making her snarl with pain. He spun to block Darius's attack, their collision sending shockwaves through the ground. But 5 against 1 was impossible odds no matter how powerful the one was. For every strike Cashin landed, he took 3 in return. Blood began to flow, his blood, painting the grass crimson, soaking into the earth that had witnessed 1,000 similar challenges. Karen watched with her heart in her throat, feeling every wound through their bond. The pain was distant, filtered through Cashin's phenomenal control, but she knew it was accumulating. Knew that eventually even he would fall. The watching crowd was divided, some cheering for the coalition, others silent with disapproval or fear. Marcus Thorne stood near the front, his expression anguished. A few other wolves who'd worked with Kira watched with tears streaming down their faces. And overhead, the moon climbed toward its peak. Karen closed her eyes and reached for her bonsai. The threads of connection appeared instantly, clearer now than ever before. She could see every bond in the clearing, the loyalty ties between pack members, the dominance hierarchies, the mate connections that glowed or flickered or festered with corruption. And she could see the bonds connecting the 5 alphas to each other. Not natural alliances born of friendship or respect, these were forged. Created through the same bond manipulation magic Ronin had used, tying the 5 alphas together into a unified force. Someone had prepared them for this. Someone had used Lunacrest techniques to make sure they fought as one coordinated unit instead of 5 individuals. Karen's eyes snapped open and found Ronin in his chains. He was smiling despite his captivity, despite his defeat. Because this had been his backup plan all along. If he couldn't keep Cashin suppressed and Karen controlled, he'd ensure that both were destroyed by others. In the circle, Cashin went down to one knee. Helena had finally found her opening, her claws raking deep furrows across his back. Blood poured from the wounds, and Cashin's breathing came in labored gasps. The 5 alphas circled him like sharks, sensing victory. "Submit," Victor commanded. "Acknowledge our authority, and we'll let you live in exile." Cashin's laugh was dark and terrible. "I don't submit to thieves and cowards who need forged bonds to work together." The revelation rippled through the crowd, gasps and angry mutters as wolves realized what Karen had already seen. The coalition wasn't natural. It was manufactured through the same forbidden magic they claimed to oppose. Victor's expression darkened. "You have no proof." "I do." Karen's voice rang out across the clearing, amplified by power she was still learning to control. "I can see the bonds connecting you. Artificial. created through stolen Lunacrest techniques. You're using the very magic you condemned my bloodline for possessing. She stepped toward the stone boundary, and several enforcers moved to stop her. But silver fire erupted around her body, making them stumble backward with yelps of pain. The flames didn't burn, they purified, revealing truth, stripping away deception. Karen, don't, Cashin gasped from inside the circle. If you cross the boundary, then I violate pack law and face execution, she finished. I know, but I'm not going to watch you die while I stand outside doing nothing. That's not who I am. That's not who we are. She locked eyes with him across the distance, and through their bond she felt his fear transmute into something else. Pride. Love. The bone-deep recognition that they were about to do something that would change everything. Together, she whispered, though he could hear. Together, he confirmed. Karen stepped across the stone boundary into the sacred circle. The moment her foot touched the consecrated ground, power exploded through the ceremonial space. The ancient stones blazed with silver light. The moon above seemed to descend, pressing closer to the earth, its light focusing on Karen like a spotlight from the divine. And her bloodline fully awakened. Her body shifted, but it wasn't the normal wolf transformation. She became something between forms, human enough to speak, wolf enough to fight, and entirely moon blood in a way that made the watching crowd fall to their knees in instinctive reverence. Silver flame wreathed her body, her eyes glowed molten white, and when she spoke, her voice resonated with the power of her ancestors. You wanted to see what a moonblood can do? The flames around her intensified. Then witness. She reached out with her consciousness, grabbing the artificial bonds connecting the 5 alphas. The magic-resisted Ronin's work had been sophisticated, layered with protections, but Karen was stronger. Her bloodline was designed for exactly this, for breaking bonds that should never have existed. She pulled. The 5 alphas screamed as the forged connection shattered. Without the unified coordination, without the artificial synchronization, they were just individuals, powerful, but no longer an invincible coalition. Cashin surged to his feet, blood still streaming from his wounds, but power burning in his eyes. He shifted fully, his wolf form massive and terrifying, and launched himself at Victor Kane. The fight that followed was chaos and poetry. Cashin fought with centuries of skill and newly freed emotion, each strike carrying the weight of everything he'd been denied. Karen moved through the space like a force of nature, her silver flames burning away the residual bond magic, protecting Cashin's flanks, ensuring the other 4 alphas couldn't coordinate their attacks. One by one, the challengers fell. Tobias submitted first, his leg broken and his pride shattered. Helena followed, recognizing she was outmatched. Darius fought longer, but eventually Cashin's jaws closed on his throat in a dominance hold that left no question about who was stronger. Sarah Nightshade tried to flee, but Karen's silver flames formed a wall, trapping her inside the circle. You wanted Ascension rules, Karen said coldly. Combat continues until the challenged alpha wins or ceases breathing. You don't get to run now. Sarah dropped to her belly in submission, her eyes bright with terror. Finally, only Victor remained. The alpha who'd issued the challenge, who'd formed the coalition, who'd believed 5 against 1 was sufficient odds. He circled Cashin warily, blood dripping from multiple wounds, his confidence shattered. You can't win, Victor snarled. Even if you defeat me, even if you survive tonight, the other territories won't accept this. They'll see a moonblood controlling an alpha, and they'll come for both of you. You've signed your own death warrants. No, Cashin said, his voice carrying despite the wolf form. We've signed yours. He lunged, and Victor tried to counter, but he was too slow. Cashin's claws found his throat, his jaws his shoulder, and within seconds Victor was on the ground, submitting, defeated. The ceremonial space fell silent except for labored breathing and whimpering from the wounded. Cashin released Victor and shifted back to human form, standing bloodied and victorious in the center of the circle. Karen moved beside him, her silver flames dimming but still present, still radiating power that made every wolf present remember why Lunacrest had been both revered and feared. "The challenge is met," Cashin announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the clearing. "Dominance law satisfied. I maintain authority over this territory, and Karen Webb maintains sanctuary under my protection." He turned slowly, making eye contact with pack leaders and council members in the crowd. "But let me be absolutely clear about something. This territory will no longer operate under the old rules. No more forced bonds. No more hierarchy maintained through fear and suppression. Any wolf who wishes to challenge for leadership can do so, but they'll face me at my full strength, not the emotionally crippled alpha you grew comfortable with." His hand found Karen's, their fingers threading together in full view of everyone watching. "And they'll face us both," he continued. "Because the age of keeping Moonblood power buried and controlled is over. Karen will train others with her bloodline gifts. We'll teach bondsight and consent bonding and every technique the other territories tried to erase. Anyone who wants to learn how to choose their own fate instead of submitting to ordained matches will have that option." The implications rippled through the crowd, revolution disguised as education, hierarchy crumbling under the weight of free choice. Meridian Cross stepped forward from the witnesses, her expression troubled but thoughtful. "You're proposing to fundamentally restructure supernatural society, to give individual wolves authority over their own bonds. The chaos that could cause is less than the suffering caused by forcing wolves into bonds they don't want," Karen interrupted. Her voice was gentle but firm. "How many wolves in this clearing right now are tied to mates they never chose? How many feel trapped, miserable, bound to people who hurt them? My bloodline was designed to prevent that suffering, to mediate when the moon's choices caused pain instead of joy." She looked around at the assembled wolves, seeing recognition in too many faces. "Lunacrest didn't fall because we were evil. We fell because we threatened the power structures that benefited from forced hierarchy. But that age is ending. Tonight proved it. You all just watched an alpha with full emotions defeat 5 opponents while fighting beside a Moonblood. This is what partnership looks like. What consent looks like. What happens when wolves choose each other freely." The silence that followed was profound. Some wolves looked angry, others thoughtful, but many, especially the younger ones, the ones who hadn't yet received their mate marks, looked hopeful. Finally, Marcus Thorne stepped forward. His daughter was beside him now, a small girl with wide eyes who clutched her father's hand. "I want to learn," Marcus said quietly. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where she can choose her own mate instead of having one forced on her. Where she can refuse if the moon makes a mistake. Where she doesn't have to be afraid of bonds being used as weapons." One by one, other wolves stepped forward. Enforcers who'd worked with Kira. Young wolves who feared their upcoming mate selections. Even a few older pack members who'd spent decades in miserable ordained bonds they couldn't escape. "We want to learn," they echoed. And watching from his chains, still smiling despite everything, Ronan Blackmore finally understood that he'd lost more than his freedom. He'd lost the war. Because revolution doesn't require violence. It just requires enough people deciding they deserve better. 5 years later, Nightfall Tower looked different. The corporate headquarters still dominated the skyline, still housed the most powerful supernatural business in the city. But the 42nd floor, once a sterile boardroom where pack leaders made decisions for wolves who had no voice, had been transformed into something else entirely. The Lunacrest Institute. Karen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake beneath the morning sun. Behind her, the classroom spaces buzzed with activity, young wolves learning bondsight, practicing consent bonding techniques, studying the history their elders had tried to erase. Some were refugees from other territories where forced bonds were still enforced. Others were locals whose mate marks had never quite felt right, who'd spent years wondering if they were broken for not loving the person fate ordained. None of them were broken. They were just wolves who understood that destiny was meant to guide, not command. You're thinking too loud. Cashin's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and the hint of teasing that still surprised her even after 5 years. I can feel your thoughts spiraling through the bond. Karen turned, and her heart did the same thing it always did when she saw him, stumbled, then raced to catch up. Cashin driven in love was a revelation. The cold, emotionless alpha had been replaced by someone who smiled freely, who laughed at terrible jokes, who cried when pack members shared their stories of finally choosing bonds they actually wanted. The curse had left scars, emotional ones that would probably never fully heal, but he learned to live with feeling everything. Some days were overwhelming, when a century of suppressed grief or joy would surface unexpectedly. But Karen was always there to anchor him, and their consent bond glowed steady and bright, proof that choosing each other had been the right decision. I was thinking about how much has changed, she admitted, moving into his arms. 5 years ago, I was a low-ranking analyst who thought the best I could hope for was surviving. Now I'm training the next generation of Moonbloods and helping wolves rewrite bonds that were causing suffering. You're also my mate, Cashin added, pressing a kiss to her temple. Though I suppose that's less of a job and more of a privilege. Karen laughed, the sound free and genuine. They'd formalized their consent bond 2 years ago in a ceremony that scandalized traditional packs and inspired hundreds of others. No ordained mark from the moon, just a choice, witnessed and celebrated, creating a connection that grew stronger every day. Have you heard from Marcus? Cashin asked, his arms tightening slightly. This morning. His daughter Emma just manifested bonsite. She's terrified but excited. Karen smiled. I invited them to visit next week so I can start training her properly. Marcus says she's already driving him crazy, seeing everyone's connections and commenting on which bonds look healthy versus which look strained. Sounds like someone else I know, Cashin teased. They stood together, watching the city, and Karen thought about everything they'd built. The Institute had graduates now, wolves trained in Lunacrest techniques who'd returned to their home territories and quietly started offering alternatives. Bond counseling. Mediation for mismatched mates. Safe spaces for wolves who wanted to refuse ordained connections. It wasn't revolution through violence. It was revolution through education. Through showing wolves there was another option beyond submitting to fate or dying to escape it. Ronan Blackmore was serving a life sentence in supernatural prison, his corporate holdings dissolved, his name a warning about what happened when power was pursued at any cost. The pack leaders who'd tried to kill Cashin had been stripped of their positions, replaced by younger alphas who understood that strength came from consent, not dominance. And Kira. Kira's name was carved into the memorial wall of the Institute. First among the fallen Moonbloods. The wolf whose death had exposed corruption and ultimately changed everything. Do you think she'd be proud? Karen asked quietly. Kira. Of what we built. Cashin's answer was immediate. I think she'd be proud you survived. That you took the grief and rage and turned it into something that helps others. That you chose life over vengeance, hope over hatred. He turned her to face him, his pale eyes no longer cold, but burning with love holding hers. I'm proud of you. Every single day. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, with certainty, with the kind of love that came from choosing each other repeatedly through years and challenges and growth. A knock on the office door interrupted the moment. One of the Institute students poked her head in, a young wolf named Arya whose mate mark had just appeared last week, connecting her to someone she'd never met and didn't want. Karen? I'm ready for today's session. If you still have time. Always, Karen assured her, squeezing Cashin's hand before releasing it. Give me 5 minutes. Arya nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. Cashin watched her go, then looked back at Karen with an expression she'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was feeling too much and needed to say it before the emotions overwhelmed him. Thank you, he said simply, for sitting on my throne that night, for choosing sanctuary with a monster everyone feared, for seeing protection where everyone else saw destruction, for loving me back to life. Karen rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Thank you for letting me. For not throwing me out of your lap. For keeping every promise you made. For showing me that I was always worthy of being chosen. They stood there for a moment longer, two souls who'd been broken by different forces, but had found each other and decided to build something better from the pieces. Then Karen straightened her shoulders, smoothed her shirt, and headed for the classroom where Arya was waiting. Where another wolf would learn that fate was a suggestion, not a command. That the moon offered guidance, but the choice was always theirs. Behind her, Cashin watched with love and pride radiating through their bond. And overhead, though it was daylight and the moon was hidden, Karen could swear she felt approval from something ancient and vast and feminine. The moon watching her descendants reclaim what had been stolen. Watching free will flourish instead of being suppressed. Watching two wolves who'd chosen each other prove that consent was always more powerful than destiny. The question isn't whether fate is real. It's whether you're brave enough to choose your own. Would you have walked across that summit hall? Would you have sat on the throne of the most dangerous alpha in the city and demanded protection? Would you have looked at a broken, cursed predator and seen sanctuary instead of destruction? Would you have chosen love over ordained destiny? Or would fear have kept you silent, submissive, trapped in a bond that felt like a cage? The moon offers matches. But you decide which ones to accept. If this story lit something inside you, if you felt Karen's rage, Cashin's loneliness, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, we can rewrite the rules that bind us, then you belong here. Subscribe to Cindy's Wolfheart Stories. Because here, we tell tales that burn. Stories where broken souls find each other and refuse to stay shattered. Where fate is questioned and choice is sacred. Where love isn't ordained, it's earned, chosen, fought for. We have more stories waiting. More wolves who defy destiny. More alphas who learn that vulnerability is strength. More bonds that form not because the moon commanded it, but because two hearts looked at each other and said yes.